Welcome to Speaking of Jesus. Each week we hear real people having a real conversation about Jesus and what he means to them. We want to invigorate you to invite Jesus into your everyday conversations too. So, what do you want to say? This is Jessica Bordelot here with Dr. Michael Ziegler.
Thank you for joining us. Have you ever been pursued? That's the question we opened with this week as we're starting our new study on the prophet Jonah, a man who was followed.
Yeah, Jonah is a prophet different than the rest.
Definitely stands out.
This week, Mike didn't tell us if our opening story should be good or bad. And I think that was for a reason, because a pursuit could go either way.
My name is Rachel, and I'm going to say the title of my story is Perfectly Met.
I'm Chad, and my title is Chased Without Knowing It.
Hey, this is Jessica. I'm going to talk about road rage.
And I'm Mike, and my title is Jury Duty. Rachel, tell us about Perfectly Met.
You know, you talk about being pursued, and so I just, in dating who is now my fiance, he just pursued me in such a way that it was such like a steady, beautiful thing that I never felt like freaked out or like, scared or like, just like, I never had a chance to like clam up or anything. And he just was always so wonderful. And I just always felt so perfectly met. And so he just is lovely and just did such a lovely job of pursuing my heart and me and everything. So
that is awesome news. Congratulations. Oh.
Okay, Chad, running from the cops. You were being chased and you didn't realize it?
So for me, it was hard to come up with a story, but thinking back, really, my conversion to Christianity from atheism my freshman year of college could really be construed like, God was at work through a lot of people to get me into the kingdom. And so, yeah, that's really what's on my mind, what I'm thinking about.
Good. Thank you for sharing that. We'll definitely talk more about that, the sense that God is pursuing us. Road rage. Tell us about it.
You know how people get crazy sometimes when you're driving and they don't like something that you did, so they kind of follow you or they get a little close to your bumper, and it always makes me uncomfortable. So I was driving along, minding my own business, and I noticed in my rearview mirror this car, and I don't know, they're going kind of fast, so I switched lanes, and she switched lanes. So like, oh. And so I switched lanes again, and she switched lanes again. I'm like, I think I just pull off on this ramp. I'm just gonna get off. And then I see the red and blue lights in my rearview mirror, and I knew, it's nothing I can do. I'm in for it. Pull over, get the ticket, say I'm sorry. They got me. So I was pursued.
Mine was jury duty. If you live in the city of St. Louis, there is a high proportionate amount of civil and criminal trials that have to get adjudicated, and the population isn't that big. And so if you're a resident of the city of St. Louis, you're going to get tagged for jury duty. And I learned that when I moved here back in 2006. But I was a student, a full-time student, and I had Air Force Reserve duty, and I just could never make it. So I kept sending in these excuse letters. They would let me go, but sure enough, they would just keep sending more letters. You've been tagged for jury duty. You've been tagged for jury duty. And I just keep making excuses. And they stopped after a while. And then it was probably 10 years, I fell off their list. And then I started getting the letters again. And finally, I had no more excuses, and I had to go. But it wasn't the worst experience. I did my civic duty and was part of that process. So it was good. They caught me. Fair range of stories here about being pursued. Some very good, being pursued by someone who loves you, whether that be just a human being or the living God. And then we've got being pursued when you're in trouble or you're trying to get out of something. Let's talk about the range of emotions that people feel when it's like they're being pursued, when they sense that.
Well, I think the first thing, because you can be being followed or pursued, right, for a really good reason. And sometimes it can be for a really sketchy, kind of creepy reason. There's a lot of times where things like that happen as well. And so I think the first I don't know if it's necessarily an emotion, but the first reaction is kind of like curiosity. Like, is this something that I should fear, or is it something that is safe? Jessica kind of talked about that too in hers, like, oh, what should I do? Like, what do I do with this? And so I think kind of just trying to sort out if it's something that we need to flee from, or if it's something that's worth sticking around for.
Yeah. It's not every day that you're pursued. It's a little out of the normal. So curiosity, I would agree, is the first reaction. What else?
A sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach as you wave goodbye to $100.
Even if you haven't done anything wrong, just having a cop car trail you or just happen to be coincidentally behind you is a little bit of that sinking pit in your stomach. You're like, oh no, what's going to happen?
And I can think of times where the red and blue lights were welcome. Like this one time where I ran out of gas, like late at night, city of Milwaukee. I'm on the side of the road. I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? Like, there's no one I can call. I am just stuck here on the highway. And so, like, I called the non-emergency number. I'm like, can you just send someone to help me? And before the police came, some guy pulled up behind me. And he's like, hey, do you need some help? And I'm like, oh, I don't know you. Police, help me. And the police came. I was never so happy to see a police car pulling back of me at that point. Because I'm like, oh, I'm safe. It's good. He's going to help me. But other than that, usually when I see the red and blue lights, I know that I was accidentally doing something I shouldn't do.
There's that whole aspect of the unknown. Like, you don't know what's going to come next, right? Like that if you have the feeling that somebody's following you down a dark street, like, what happens next? And so I think, I don't know, I guess maybe all the things that I'm thinking of kind of have like a little bit of an element of fear, because there's somewhat of a fear of the unknown, of like what happens next.
Yeah, your state of mind. Are you looking to be rescued? Are you looking to be noticed? Are you looking to get away? That's going to affect the way you react to somebody coming after you.
For me, it was just emotions or feelings that came after the fact, because I didn't know it in the time that it was happening. But looking back on it, once I converted to Christianity and started following Jesus, and then pretty quickly had a sense that I should, also go to seminary and pursue becoming a pastor and so on. For me, looking back, it was all the stories that I knew of how many people were praying for me while I was still an atheist, right? I had been asked to join a church band, to play drums. It was totally a gig while I was an atheist. These people were so moved to pray for me, and like hundreds of people in a congregation and other folks connected to some of these church leaders who had extended the invitation to me. Really thinking back upon that after the fact, God was up to something, right? And then when I became a Christian and started following Jesus, it felt like the right place. Like maybe more right than any other place or set of feelings I had had previous to that. It's as if certain pieces of the puzzle of my life up to that point, and I was only a college freshman, so, this isn't like hugely profound or based on, a massive world of experience, but it's like certain ways that my parents raised me, suddenly I was like free to live into that, whereas prior I was kind of in this mode of rebelling against and rejecting it because it wasn't, the fashionable way to live amongst, high school students of my day. It was really interesting, but it's looking back. I didn't have these feelings in the moment. I didn't know what was happening in the time.
I think from the perspective of like somebody pursuing my heart and like in that type of relationship, there's also this it's like this wonder, like there's something awesome about it, that somebody like sees you and chooses you and like shows up for you, and like there's something that's really beautiful and like something fulfilling in that, right? And so like I guess when you say what's the span of emotions, it really does kind of go all the way across, run the gamut, if you will.
If it's a mutually desired meeting, then being pursued can make you feel special, right? But if it's not, then you feel like it's a creeper, right? Like there has to be like a mutual agreement that I want this too. Otherwise, you just pull away more and you try to get off the exit and you're like, oh, I think I'll just drive away. I don't know. I think it has to be like with the mutuality. Is that a word?
It's a good point, because when we're dealing with what Chad's talking about, with the sense that God is pursuing each of us, the feeling's not always mutual. People run. There's this poem written about 100 years ago by a guy named Francis Thompson. The poem is called The Hound of Heaven, and it's describing what it feels like to be pursued by God when you don't want to be, when you're running from God. So here's a few lines to share, and just want to get your reaction to this. He says, I fled him, that is God, down the nights and down the days. I hid from him, from those strong feet that followed after, with unhurrying chase and unperturbed pace, deliberate speed, majestic instancy. Though I knew his love who followed, yet was I sore adread, lest having him I must have naught beside. So what's your reaction to that? Have you ever felt like that, like God's pursuing you?
Yes, I mean, obviously I certainly have, and think about it on the regular now. I've known about this poem for a long time. It was first quoted in a book I read by a Christian apologist, probably fairly early on after my conversion, where I was still trying to figure out some things, adjust my worldview, as it were, so trying to get answers to some questions that stood for me prior to becoming a Christian, like objections, and made me hesitant to believe.
You can relate.
Yeah, I mean, so in a way, like thinking about God chasing you down, my conversion experience was part of that, right? To just look back and think, he was actively at work coming after me. This Hound of Heaven poem, definitely related. And also related to the fact that, as we teach and we think about humans in terms of relationship to God, by default we think humans are opposed, right? We want to be God ourselves, in charge of everything. And probably one of the biggest things we know is a barrier to following Jesus is giving up control, right, of everything. And it's part of discipleship forever. Then we struggle with it forever. But I would say this poem to me exhibits those sorts of emotions, right? That kind of fear, as I hear it, is what's behind this guy being pursued by God, right? Is like, no, I don't want it. No, because you have to submit finally in the end if you're going to follow. And that is just something that goes against the grain of who we are.
The line that, though I knew his love, I was full of dread because I thought that if I were to have him and he were to have me, then I would lose everything else. And I remember feeling that in junior high and high school, the sense that I believed that God was real, but I felt that being fully his would cause me to miss out on good things in life. And I remember I ran from him in that sense, even to the point where I told myself I didn't believe in God anymore. I don't think I was ever a theoretical atheist, but I was certainly a functional, practical atheist, like, living as though God doesn't exist. And I think that fear was at the base of it, is I didn't want to lose what I thought I might be able to get by not following him.
It's a really interesting concept for me to think about. As somebody, I don't feel like there's been a lot of times in my life where I felt particularly far from God, like that, or that I was actually that I was fleeing him. I can't really connect with that feeling so much, but cognitively, I understand that God is constantly pursuing me in everything. That I just feel like maybe it's kind of like when you get used to somebody being in the room with you, you don't take as much notice of them. Like, oh, that person's sitting over there. You're used to them being in this room with you, and you didn't realize that they were sitting there in the corner chair where they always are. And yesterday, I was practicing with my daughter. She says memory work on Fridays. I was going over her memory work. I couldn't remember what she had for this week, and her verse was, "The Lord is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, and rich in love." And so, as soon as I started repeating those words with her, I just felt this immediate sense of, yes, guys, this is what it's all about. Like, and immediately connected back with that. This is the core of who we are, being loved by God, but also how we love each other, like how we live together as family. It's also shaped by this. And that's a moment that God was pursuing my heart in that moment, but it wasn't something I was trying to run away from him. I was just right there. And sometimes with that little tap, tap, tap on your shoulder, remember.
At the end of Psalm 23, that's how David speaks when he talks about the Lord being his shepherd. He says, goodness and mercy, and the word is pursue. Goodness and mercy will follow after me, will chase me, will pursue me all my days, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
The times that I've felt persistently reminded of something in God's word, where you keep reading that verse in a different way, or the same message is in your devotion book for the next day, and so you're like, where is this coming from? I keep finding it's been verses of comfort or forgiveness. Yeah, so it's always been mutually looked for, where I was like, oh, thank you for reminding me of that. Thank you for keep sending me that, continuing to persistently send me that message of comfort or peace or forgiveness that I'm looking for, that I need to be reminded of. Like the police officer that pulled up to help me when Creeper Guy was sitting in the car in back of me. And I'm like, oh, thank you for persistently driving on the highway till you saw me here.
This is a good lead-in for our new study on the Old Testament book of Jonah. Over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be talking about this man who was literally pursued by God and all the forces of creation, almost. Jonah was a prophet of the Lord, the God of Israel, in the 8th century when King Jeroboam ruled in Israel. He lived about the same time as the prophets Hosea, Amos, and Joel.
We did a series on the book of Daniel earlier this season. Daniel was a prophet during the time when God's people were in exile in Babylon. But that all happened 200 years after Jonah's time. So we're going back in time a little bit.
And if you wanted to go back and listen to those episodes about the prophet Daniel that Jessica just mentioned, go back to episode 63, Speaking of Defeated. Sometimes we hear the word prophet and we only think about somebody making prophecies to predict the future, but that's not quite how it is in the Old Testament. The prophets were more than that. They were God's representatives to the people of Israel, the children of Israel. God spoke his words through these prophets, and they shared his words with the people.
The message was often, it was like a call to repent from worshiping idols and turn back to the true God who loved them. But then we have Jonah. So if prophets were like God's microphone, Jonah tried to unplug it.
Yeah, the story starts just like the others do in the Old Testament. The word of the Lord comes to someone, gives them a message, sends them on a mission. Usually the prophet, he gets up, shares God's message, faces all, even death, rather than turning back. But Jonah doesn't even start. Got up and ran the other way.
So listen to this first chapter of Jonah. Imagine the scenes. See what grabs your attention. What word or phrase kind of stands out to you? Because after we hear it, we'll ask our guests to share what they thought.
The word of the Lord, the God of Israel, the great I am. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise and go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, because their evil has come up before me. But Jonah arose to flee to Tarshish, the opposite direction, away from the presence of the Lord. Jonah went down to Joppa and found a ship headed for Tarshish. And after he paid the price, he went aboard and sailed to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break apart. And all the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God, and they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone down into the depths of the ship, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. The captain came and said to him, How can you sleep? Get up, call on your God. Who knows, maybe that God of yours will have compassion on us and we won't perish.
The sailors said to one another, "Come on, let's cast lots and find out who is responsible for bringing this evil upon us." And they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they said to him, "Tell us, please, who's responsible for bringing this evil on us? What do you do? Where do you come from? What's your country? From what people are you?" And Jonah said, "I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land." And the men were afraid with a great fear and said to him, "What have you done?" See, they knew that he was running from the presence of the Lord because he had already told them so. So they asked him, "What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us?" For the sea was getting more and more tempestuous. And Jonah answered, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea, and it will become calm for you. For I know that it is on my account that this great storm has come upon you." Instead, the men did their best to row back to land, but they could not, because the sea grew even wilder than before. And so the sailors cried out to the Lord, "O Lord, do not let us perish because of this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man, because you are the Lord and you do just as you please." And they lifted Jonah up and they hurled him into the sea. And the raging sea grew calm. And the sailors worshiped the Lord with a great worship. And they offered sacrifices to the Lord, and they made vows to him. And then the Lord provided a great fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was inside the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Word or phrase?
Instead.
Instead.
I would say he went away from the Lord. The numerous times at the beginning where that image of him going in the exact opposite direction of where God called him to.
Yeah, away from the presence of the Lord.
Mine is the same as Chad's.
Presence of the Lord, yeah. And mine was, he had already told them so. Rachel, let's talk about instead.
God told Jonah to do a thing, and instead he did this other thing. I don't know. I mean, I think it's so interesting that God gave him a direction, a directive, and instead he had this agency to choose a different thing, and he sure as heck did it.
The other instead that's really interesting, that's the opposite in some ways, is when the sailors instead tried to row the ship back to land. And so they also, in a way, are not doing what the Lord would have them do, but they're doing it out of mercy. Gentiles who don't know the Lord are actually showing someone mercy. They don't want to kill him. They don't want to. They're going to try to do everything they can not to throw him overboard. So that's an interesting contrast.
They don't understand. Jonah doesn't really understand at the beginning. The other sailors don't really understand, and so like they choose it instead. And
they have that agency to try anyways. Chad, what was it that got you about Jonah fleeing?
I think it's fascinating to know, for the reader, that here's a guy that's a prophet of God, and God says, "Go do this." And a prophet's like, I'll take a pass on that, and pieces out in the other direction. I don't know. I mean, this is jumping ahead to some of your other questions, but it already indicates to me something about God, right? The kinds of people that God is willing to use to spread his good news and his word, right? Like, all intents and purposes, Jonah starts out this book as a complete and total failure and never totally comes around even by the end. Right? God has the last word, and you never know if Jonah finally is like, okay, fine, God, I relent, right? He did the thing right? He ends up following through on what was commanded, but did his attitude change? I don't know. You don't know if he changes his mind. And that's fascinating to me, you know, thinking about the fact that, well, I'm supposed to be a prophet too, in a way, right? And I, you know, as a human being, a follower of Jesus, often I'm a massive failure. God still uses Jonah, therefore he still uses me.
He has this moment of Christ-likeness, even in chapter 1. He voluntarily sacrifices his life to save others. You know, pick me up and throw me into the sea. So he's got this glowing moment of sacrificial, self-giving love. You know, even the way it's worded, like they lifted him up, and you can like see him in this cruciform state. And he saves these guys, and they all are converted to faith in the Lord by his agency, which is still not the best. You know, God uses it. God does everything right as Jonah does everything wrong. So he has got these moments, but then he's also got these low points.
My word was, and Jonah fled from the presence of the Lord. Because who says he gets to do that? Is that an option? You know, God never makes us do anything. And so that kind of blows my mind, because he's God. He can do whatever he wants. He could have just made Jonah's feet move that way. You know, he pursues us. He sends prophets and preachers. He's made donkeys talk, trying to get the word across to Balaam. But he never makes us do anything. What a compassionate and gentle pursuer. It's not a pursuer that's going to forcefully do something against your will, but a loving pursuit. He doesn't force us to do things.
Pursuing a unique relationship with humankind, with human creatures. All the other creatures obey without question. The sea, the fish, everything. The worm, the vine, the sun, the wind, everything God will enlist in his service in this short little book. But it's the human creatures that he wants a special relationship with, where they respond. Like you said, he's not forcing Jonah to move. He's not moving Jonah's feet like he moves the sea.
It's interesting to think about it as like a gentle pursuit, right? I don't know that Jonah might have felt that any of that was very gentle. Like the rest of the story, you know, like Jonah probably wasn't feeling like things were very gentle. He was probably like, oh, now I'm in this storm. Now I'm in this fish, you know.
But the fish was provision for him. The fish wasn't punishment. The fish saved him from drowning, you know? And
yeah, I don't know if he knew that, though.
Right.
I don't know. If I was drowning in the middle of water and I couldn't breathe and something...
And a giant shark eats you, that's going to give you comfort.
Doesn't eat him. He got out alive. It protected him in a little scuba suit.
You don't know that you're not going to be digested.
It saved his life.
Yes, you're absolutely right. In hindsight, we can say all this, but there, in the midst of it, I agree with Rachel. It doesn't feel very gentle.
But he didn't press the buttons on the back of the robot to make Jonah believe him. You know, he didn't like operate the remote control and make him say the right words. It was still Jonah's agency to go. And he might have done it grudgingly. Fine, I'll tell these people your message of love, you know, or I'll tell these people that judgment is coming. He didn't, but he still did it.
I like the fact that he resists despite getting what so many of us want. Right? He clearly hears God speak to him and give him very concrete direction. Good grief, how many of us want that?
I wish I just had a voice from God.
How many of us want that, right? God, right. I want to know what to do. Well, go do this. I think not, God. And he bails.
I mean, I guess, yeah, how many times have I kind of worked out, is this really what, is this God's, is this the right thing? Is this what you're asking me to do? I don't know. I haven't ended up in any bellies of fishes yet, but
I can think of, stupid choices I've made, and it just felt like God's provision to get me out of them. To say, okay, let me help you. You're floundering, you're drowning in the water. I will do everything that I can to get you on shore safely.
Yeah, floundering.
I was thinking too about God's pursuit of those sailors, like a whole ship of Joppa sailors, I don't know, these non-Hebrew, non-believing sailors. God is not just pursuing Jonah, he pursued those sailors and wherever they might be sailing. And it's all in a great pursuit of all those people in Nineveh. He keeps calling people to himself. and doing whatever he can to keep that invitation going, to keep sending it again and again.
What are we getting to know about this God?
I'll just go back to what I said a couple of minutes ago. I think Jonah is just one of many stories across all of the scriptures where God chooses to do his work through feeble, weak, oppositionally minded human beings. Even when it seems at the end of the story, Jonah is maybe not so convinced that God is, great and loving and so on. In the prayer, he confessed some of those very things, right?
Yeah.
He's still
That's what bothers him.
Still,
Yeah.
he's unhappy that God would be so gracious to Nineveh, but almost somewhat thankless that he does it for him. It's so interesting to see the humanity of this guy, right? His brokenness where, in some ways he's very good, and in other ways, he totally gets it screwed up, and, and then it's narrated, as Rachel would say, so dramatically, right? The scorching wind, in chapter 4. It's just fascinating how God chooses to use us, humans, to accomplish the work of his kingdom.
He doesn't let our stupidness stop his plan. He'll change the things that we're trying to do for ourselves, and he'll even work through that. We can't stop his plan.
Can't get away from the mess of it all. It's so messy, and I want to control things. I want to be able to tie it up in a pretty little bow and a package, and everything has its place, which probably feels weird if you ever see the inside of my car. My car doesn't function this way. I want to understand things. I want to understand God. I want to understand how it's all working. And I think just the very real reality that sometimes the world can be messy. It is messy. God is not afraid to work in the mess, will work in the mess, pursues us through the mess, even if it's a mess of our own doing.
Our God, the true God, Jonah's God, is the God who is getting involved. He's not distant, and it goes with the pursuing thing. But I think also people have a conception of God that he's uninvolved, he's distant, he's aloof. And this account turns that whole thing upside down. He is not a distant God. He is the God who's in everything, and he is pursuing us through every means.
There's this repeated theme of God using nature, right? He tells Jonah, do this, I'm sending you, and Jonah doesn't do it. But he sends the wind and the waves. He hurls the wind. Creation obeys him. He spoke to the fish, and the fish spit him up. And then later, he speaks to the plant and says, grow up plants and make a shade for Jonah. And then he speaks to a worm, and even the worm listens to him. So God's using all of creation and all of these things that his hands are in. We still can say no. Even a worm listens. I want to know what that means. I'm interested, as we continue to talk about Jonah, what other significance there is by drawing this contrast between creation that listens and people that don't. So
it'd be an interesting devotion or sermon title, right? Even a worm knows better than you.
He mentions Jonah by name, one of the few prophets that gets a call out by the Lord Jesus himself. It seems like he's got a heart for these totally human people right in the middle, like us. But Jesus identifies with Jonah. He compares himself to Jonah. He says that he came to give the sign of Jonah. That's in Matthew chapter 12. It's also in the Gospel of Luke. He says something similar.
Okay, let's stop for a second and take a look at that. It's in Matthew 12.
As usual, Jesus is doing his thing. He's teaching. And in this passage, drawing the connection between what we say and what we think, how our words and actions show what's in our heart. He's calling the listeners to repent from their heart. As he's teaching them, he's interrupted by the naysayers.
Starts at verse 38. Then some of the scribes and Pharisees answered him, saying, Teacher, we wish to see a sign from you. But he answered them, An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it, except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah. And behold, something greater than Jonah is here.
I appreciate that passage so much, even just on the level of clearly Jesus believed this stuff actually happened. This isn't some legend. This isn't some fish story. He's talking about real people of Nineveh who are going to rise in the judgment.
Anytime Jesus references the Old Testament, I kind of perk up and listen.
Yeah.
Because it's so interesting. What did Jesus think of this?
This is the authoritative interpretation. What do you think about that? What do you make of Jesus identifying with Jonah in this way?
That was something you said when you were talking about the different gods that people were like calling out to. And you said that this is a God who has a name. Jonah's God has a name. But not only does Jonah know the name of his God, but his God knows his name.
Jonah's name means dove in Hebrew. So it maybe kind of like he's kind of flighty. Or, maybe referencing something with the Holy Spirit.
Or Noah. Noah sent out the dove, and the dove listened.
Yep.
The dove did what it was supposed to do, but Jonah wouldn't.
And then his father's name, he's called the son of Amittai. That means in Hebrew, the faithful one. So again, there's a little irony there. He's the son of the faithful one is running away. But I like how you say that. Jesus knows Jonah's name and gives him a call out, mentions him.
One of the things that's interesting is that Jonah is sent to speak to people outside of the Israelites, right? And, Jesus is coming and saying that the good news is for everyone, not just God's chosen people, the Israelites, but that the umbrella that essentially comes to define what it means to be the chosen people is one that becomes universal. Like God is now in pursuit of all people, right? And Jonah is amongst some of the other prophets, right? With he's giving the good word to foreign people, right? Not the Israelites in this case, right? Jeremiah similarly, for example, but Jonah in this short passage, he's sent very specifically to a people outside of Israel. And that's a sign, essentially, right? It signals something that Jesus' ministry was up to, something new.
He specifically, Jesus mentions the people of Nineveh. So in this whole sign of Jonah discussion in Matthew, he mentions even the people of Nineveh repented. They turned to the Lord because of the sign of Jonah, the preaching of Jonah. So in some ways, it's got to have something to do with not just like a miracle of getting swallowed by a fish and surviving it. It's more about the mission that he is sent to the people to call them back to the Lord, that Jesus is enacting as well.
Wait, spoiler alert. Mike, you just gave away the ending.
Everybody
now we all
knows
know what
the
happens in the
ending.
book of
Come
Jonah.
on.
There's still 3 weeks to go in the study. Now you gave it all away.
If you haven't heard the story, the people of Nineveh repented, just like Jesus said they did. So there you go, Jessica. You already spoiled it. You gave us Jesus' words. Jonah finally got there and shared God's word with them. But there is way more going on. There are more plot points coming that we'll get to listen to. So it's not a spoiler. But just the way that God calls the hearts of these pagan people of Nineveh to himself. That shows us God's nature. So we have a lot to discuss in this book. The plot points are just beginning.
Even Jesus refers back to Jonah. Like when the Pharisees asked Jesus, show us a sign. We'll believe what you're saying if you show it. Prove it. And he's going to. Jonah was buried in the ocean for 3 days and then spit out safely on shore. That was proof enough for the people of Nineveh. They trusted that he was sent by God. Who knows? Maybe they saw Jonah spit up on the shore.
I mean, even if they didn't see it, maybe they heard about it. It's pretty miraculous because they believed it. They believed his message.
And Jesus showed an even greater sign. It wasn't just from the ocean to land. It was death to life. Reversing death is an even greater miracle than sending a big fish.
And this sign of Jonah, it may refer to this moment of Christ-likeness that we heard in chapter 1. So Jonah, he voluntarily sacrifices his life to save these sailors. Pick me up and throw me into the sea. I mean, that takes guts to say that. So he's got this glowing moment of sacrificial, self-giving love. He gives us a glimpse of what Jesus will do for all the wayward sailors and Ninevehs of the whole world. But then in Jonah's experience, it's everybody who listens to him. Literally everyone he talks to, every pagan he meets ends up repenting and turning to the Lord. But it's a little different for Jesus. People reject him. His own people reject him. So the layers of comparison are intriguing. How are you hearing good news in this?
That God is not only constantly pursuing me and with me and like calling me to be his child and to live that life out, like also that he's doing that with everyone else as well.
I think that's such good news as well because it helps me see other people with a little bit more patience and a little bit more understanding, grace, that all of us in some ways are in the middle of our own Jonah story. Being pursued, having our moments when we're doing what we're supposed to do, but having our moments when we're not. To know that I've been given this grace to live out my own Jonah story. And God's doing this for everybody else simultaneously.
God's not going to give up on me. He's going to keep giving me more opportunities. He keeps taking care of me, providing for me.
The Francis Thompson poem, that unhurrying chase, unperturbed pace. He's not like frantically chasing after you like a crazy stalker. That's not how God is pursuing us. He's unhurrying chase, steadfast, resolved to find us, to find you wherever you are.
I know we're in the Old Testament this week, but the theme of being pursued keeps reminding me of a parable that Jesus told in the New Testament. It's in Luke 15. So this is what Jesus says. He says, "What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he has lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open country and go after that one that's lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, for I found my sheep that was lost.'"
That's the perfect New Testament reference, actually. There are so many parallels in Luke 15. You think about Luke 15, it's the lost sheep, then the lost coin, and then the lost sons. So not just the one son, but both sons are lost in a way. And it's so crazy because Jonah is both sons. He's the son that ran away, and he's the son who won't come into the party. Jesus is so brilliant that he's taking in all these Old Testament themes and he's putting them together in new and creative ways. But we'll talk about that more, the third and fourth talk on Jonah. But yes, the shepherd reference, it's perfect. The shepherd's not chasing down the sheep to trap it. He's not trying to harm it. It's not a hunt. He's searching for the sheep to save its life. It's a rescue mission.
Like in Isaiah 40, it says, "He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms. He carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young." I mean, it's unmistakably compassionate and caring.
So if you're running from God, God's footsteps might sound like a chase. But if you're lost and you're scared, it's the sound of help.
It's the difference between hearing the police sirens when I had been speeding.
You do get in trouble with the law a lot.
Yeah, just a couple times. Well, but I was happy to hear those police sirens when I was out of gas in the middle of the night. Those red flashing lights were such a relief.
Right, so if you've tried to run from God, but now you found yourself lost, out of gas on the side of the road somewhere, take heart. God knows right where you are. He's always known. He's been waiting, he's watching, and he's coming to help you home, even if that means sending a big fish.
Thanks for being a part of the conversation. You can listen to past episodes on our website, jesuspodcast.org, or wherever podcasts are found. Hey, please leave us a rating and a review. It really helps.
You're invited to our Facebook group. It's called Speaking of Jesus. You can see pictures of our guests each week and interact with what you've heard. If you like the show, let us know. Send us an email. You can email LH_MIN@LHM.org. That's LH_min@LHM.org. It would mean a lot to hear from you.
Next week, we discuss do-overs. We don't always get them, but we all need them. We pray that this week's podcast has encouraged you in your faith and has invigorated you to speak of his love into the lives of those around you. See you next week. As always, we'll hear from Dr. Ziegler and a real conversation between real people speaking of Jesus. What do you want to say?
That was a tight opening.
Can you hear that lawnmower outside my window?
I can't.
Okay, good.